You broke the plate. The words hit harder than the crash itself. The entire table froze, eyes turning toward Kendra, the maid, the scapegoat, the girl they loved to humiliate. Anne's smirk spread as her mother's voice thundered through the hall, calling Kendra a clumsy fool, demanding she kneel and clean her mess. Tears burned her eyes as laughter filled the room, her hands bleeding while she gathered the shards of a plate she didn't break. But before she could rise, the mansion doors slammed open. Heavy footsteps echoed through the silence. And when the stranger's eyes met hers, every cruel smile in that room began to fade. Their world would never be the same again. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The air was heavy with rain the morning Kendra buried her mother. A thin veil of mist hung over the small cemetery in Queens, the scent of wet soil clinging to her dress as she knelt by the wooden cross. There were no flowers, no family, no one but her. Her mother's last words whispered through her mind like a melody she couldn't silence. Be strong, my child. But strength was hard to find when the world had taken everything. Kendra's suitcase was old, the handle half broken, the zipper refusing to close properly. Inside were 2 dresses, a pair of worn shoes, and a faded photograph of her mother holding her as a baby, the only proof she had of a time when love existed. When the letter from the Davison household came, offering her a job as a maid, she took it without hesitation. Anything was better than the loneliness that followed her home each night. The Davison mansion stood tall and silent at the edge of Long Island, its marble pillars shining beneath the afternoon sun. To outsiders, it was the image of success, manicured gardens, polished cars, and smiles that seemed to last forever. But behind those gates, cruelty had a name. And that name was Davison. Mrs. Davison greeted Kendra with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You'll stay in the servants' quarters, she said, her tone clipped, as if Kendra's presence alone was a stain on the floor. Breakfast is served at 6. Don't be late. I can't stand lazy help. Mr. Davison barely looked up from his newspaper. His silence was his weapon, a reminder that she didn't exist unless spoken to. And then there was Anne, their only daughter, beautiful, spoiled, and merciless. From the first day, she looked at Kendra not as another human being, but as something to command, to break, to humiliate. That night, Kendra sat on her small cot in the servants' quarters, tracing her mother's handwriting on the folded note she carried everywhere. Be strong. She whispered it aloud, as though repeating it could keep her heart from falling apart. Days turned into weeks. Kendra learned the rhythm of the mansion, the creak of the floorboards, the shrill tone of Mrs. Davison's orders, the way Anne's laughter echoed like broken glass. She cleaned marble floors until her knees ached, polished silver until her fingers bled. The scent of bleach clung to her skin, seeping into every breath she took. And still, she said nothing. When guests arrived, Mrs. Davison would make her stand in the hallway, tray in hand, eyes lowered. Smile, she would whisper through gritted teeth, but don't look at anyone directly. You make them uncomfortable when you stare. Kendra obeyed. Always. And, however, found pleasure in testing her patience. She'd spill juice on the carpets, knock over vases, or rip her own dresses, and every time the same words followed, it was Kendra's fault. Mrs. Davison would sigh dramatically and shake her head. Honestly, child, why can't you do anything right? And Kendra would bow her head, whispering apologies for sins she didn't commit. She ate her meals in silence, sitting on the cold tile floor of the kitchen after everyone else had gone to bed. The taste of leftover soup and burnt bread became her comfort. Sometimes she'd catch her reflection in the oven door, tired eyes, cracked lips, skin marked with exhaustion. The reflection of a girl forgotten by the world. At night, she wrote in her secret notebook, the one she hid beneath a loose floorboard under her bed. Words became her only escape. She wrote about her mother's smile, about the smell of lavender in their old apartment, about the dream that one day she'd walk through a door where people said her name with kindness. But each morning shattered that dream anew. One Sunday afternoon, while dusting the hallway, she overheard the Davisons talking. Mrs. Davison's voice carried through the open doorway. She's lucky we took her in, she said sharply. A girl like that, she should be grateful for the roof over her head. Imagine, without us, she'd be in the streets. And giggled. She looks like she already came from one. Kendra froze. Every word cut deeper than the last. She wanted to scream, to tell them they were wrong, that she wasn't worthless, that her mother had raised her with love and pride. But silence was safer. So she kept dusting, tears falling unnoticed onto the polished wood. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mansion, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and gold, Kendra stepped outside for a moment of air. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter from the terrace. The Davisons were dining, surrounded by friends, glowing in their perfect world. She stood near the servants' gate, looking at the horizon, whispering to her mother's memory. "I'm trying to be strong, Mama. But it hurts." Inside the mansion, Mrs. Davison called out sharply, "Kendra, where are you?" She ran back, breathless. Dinner plates lined the table, wine glasses shimmering under chandeliers. Mrs. Davison's face twisted with disdain. "You're late. Do you think you can wander around while we eat? Do you forget your place?" Kendra bowed her head. "I'm sorry, ma'am." And smirked. Maybe she was dreaming she's one of us. The laughter that followed was cruel, sharp, and echoing. That night, Kendra lay awake, the moonlight spilling across her blanket. The house was quiet now, but she could still hear their voices, still feel the sting of their words. She turned the page of her notebook and wrote, "They see me as nothing. But I will not always be nothing." Her heart ached for the father she never knew, the man her mother said was white, who left when debt swallowed him whole. She imagined what he might look like now. Was he alive? Did he ever think about her? She brushed the thought away. Hope was dangerous. The next morning, Mrs. Davison assigned her to the East Wing, the part of the mansion reserved for guests. As she dusted the portraits on the wall, she paused before one painting. It showed a young Mr. Davison shaking hands with another man, tall, confident, and smiling, a man with her same hazel eyes. She frowned, feeling a strange chill she couldn't explain. For a brief second, she wondered if her father ever walked halls like these, halls of wealth and cruelty, where people smiled through masks. But she didn't know that somewhere across the city, that same man, Peterson, was staring at her photograph for the first time in decades, his heart breaking with the realization of what he'd done. For now, though, Kendra remained the silent shadow in the house of polished marble and whispered cruelty, a girl with dreams too fragile for the world she served, clinging to the last words of her mother like a prayer. "Be strong, my child. Be strong." The morning began quietly, one of those rare moments when sunlight slipped through the long velvet curtains of the Davison mansion and filled the corridors with a kind of false peace. Kendra cherished mornings like this, the stillness before orders began to fly, before Anne's footsteps echoed through the hall like a warning. She had just finished dusting the gallery, her reflection faintly visible in the polished surface of a porcelain vase that sat on a pedestal by the staircase. It was a delicate piece, painted in soft blue and white, with golden dragons curling around its rim, imported, priceless, and beautiful. She paused to admire it, not because she wanted it, but because it was the only beauty she was allowed to touch, even if it was just through a cleaning cloth. The vase reminded her of something her mother once said, "Even fragile things have a story, and sometimes, their cracks make them stronger." For a fleeting second, she smiled. But peace in the Davison home never lasted long. Anne's voice drifted down the stairs, cheerful and commanding all at once. "Mother wants tea in the garden. Hurry up, Kendra." Kendra nodded silently and moved to the kitchen. She brewed the tea, placed the tray carefully, and carried it out to the garden. The sun shimmered on the roses as Mrs. Davison sat reading a magazine, her pearl necklace glinting against her neck, and was on her phone, laughing at something shallow, something that didn't matter. Finally, Mrs. Davison said sharply when Kendra approached, "You took your time." "I'm sorry, ma'am." And reached for the sugar bowl, her manicured fingers careless, her eyes elsewhere. The porcelain lid slipped from her grasp, clinking against the tray. "Ugh, look what you made me do," she snapped, though it was her own fault. Kendra bowed her head. "I'll clean it right away." She knelt, wiping the spill, her cheeks burning. She could feel Mrs. Davison's eyes on her, heavy and cold. "You should really learn to be more careful," the woman murmured. Kendra wanted to speak, to defend herself, but the words never made it past her lips. Silence had become her shield, fragile but necessary. Later that afternoon, as she dusted the living room, and came storming in, her phone in one hand and anger in her eyes. "I told you to leave my things alone," she hissed. Kendra looked up, confused. I haven't touched anything, Miss Anne. Anne's glare deepened. Don't lie to me. My bracelet is missing. The gold one Father gave me. I haven't seen it, Kendra stammered. Mrs. Davison appeared almost instantly, as though summoned by drama. What's going on here? Mother, she took my bracelet, and cried. It was on my vanity, and now it's gone. The accusation hung in the air like a curse. Mrs. Davison's face hardened. Kendra, you know we don't tolerate theft in this house. I didn't take it, ma'am. I swear I didn't. Enough. Mrs. Davison's voice sliced through her plea. You'll return it quietly, or I'll call the police. We have given you food and shelter. Don't repay us with deceit. Kendra's chest tightened. Her hands trembled, and for the first time in weeks, tears filled her eyes. Please, ma'am. I didn't. Before she could finish, and stormed upstairs, returning moments later with the bracelet in hand. Oh, here it is, she said softly, pretending embarrassment. It must have fallen under the dresser. Mrs. Davison exhaled, but didn't apologize. She just muttered, be more careful next time. Then she turned to Kendra. And you should be grateful my daughter found it. I won't be so patient next time. Kendra lowered her gaze. Yes, ma'am. She walked away quietly, her heart a storm of humiliation and rage. But even as she swallowed her pride, she knew this wasn't the last time she'd be blamed for something she didn't do. That evening proved her right, and was showing off the living room to some visiting friends. Laughter filled the air, the kind of laughter that made Kendra feel like furniture, unseen, unneeded, but always present. And pranced across the room, gesturing dramatically toward the expensive decor. Mother got this vase from France, she said proudly, brushing her hand against the same blue and gold porcelain that Kendra had polished that morning. Her fingers lingered too long. The sleeve of her silk blouse caught the edge of the vase, and before anyone could move, crash. The sound was thunder. The vase shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces across the marble floor. For a moment, no one breathed. Anne's face turned pale, then red. Her friends gasped, covering their mouths. And then, as if rehearsed, Anne's eyes darted toward Kendra. She did it, she screamed. Kendra froze. What? You were dusting earlier, I saw you near it. You must have loosened it. It's your fault. Mrs. Davison came running in. What on earth happened here? Mother, Kendra broke your vase. Anne wailed. I told her not to touch it, but she never listens. Kendra's lips parted, but no words came. What could she say? That she hadn't even been near the vase since morning? That Anne's lie would crush her no matter what truth she spoke. Mrs. Davison's face darkened with fury. Kendra, how dare you? That vase cost more than your life. You will apologize this instant. Tears burned her eyes as she sank to her knees. I'm sorry, ma'am, she whispered, voice trembling. It wasn't me, but I'm sorry. Anne's friends giggled behind their hands. The humiliation was complete. Clean this mess, Mrs. Davison ordered coldly. And be careful not to cut yourself. It'd be a shame to stain the floor with blood. Kendra gathered the shards with shaking fingers, each piece slicing deeper into her palms. She wanted to scream, to tell them that it wasn't fair, but fairness didn't exist here. When the guests left and the laughter faded, she carried the broken pieces to the trash, one by one. Each shard reflected her face, cracked, distorted, but still standing. That night, in the dim glow of her candle, she opened her secret notebook again. Her hands ached from the cuts, but she wrote anyway. Today, I was blamed again. For something I didn't do. Maybe one day, the world will see me for who I am, not the girl they can punish for sport, but the one who survived every cruel word. She paused, staring at the ink smudge where her tear had fallen. They think I am weak because I kneel. But they don't know, I am only gathering strength. The wind outside whispered against the windowpane, carrying the faint scent of rain. She imagined her mother's voice again, soft, steady, full of love. Be strong, my child. Kendra closed her notebook and tucked it back beneath the floorboard. Tomorrow would bring new blame, new pain, but she had begun to understand something. That silence, while heavy, was not the same as defeat. In that silence, she was watching. learning, waiting. And one day, she promised herself, they would all remember the girl they tried to break. The city never truly slept. Its lights bled through the fog like restless souls, reflecting off wet asphalt as rain hammered the streets below. Somewhere high above that chaos, in a glass tower that pierced the night sky, sat a man whose name made powerful men tremble, Peterson. To the world, he was untouchable, a white titan in tailored suits, head of one of New York's most feared underground empires. But behind the perfectly polished mask of control, ghosts whispered his name in the dark. He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid catching the faint glow of lightning through the window. The storm outside felt almost personal, wild, angry, and impossible to ignore. He stood there, watching the rain trace jagged lines down the glass, and for the first time in years, he felt small. Peterson had built an empire from the ashes of failure. Once he was nothing, a desperate man drowning in debt, hunted by those he owed. When he fled all those years ago, he told himself it was for survival. But the truth was simpler, uglier. He had run because he was afraid. He still remembered the day he left. The small apartment smelled of baby powder and warm milk. His wife, Leah, held their infant daughter in her arms, her eyes soft despite the worry shadowing them. "Don't go," she had pleaded. "We can face this together." He couldn't meet her eyes. "They'll kill me, Leah. If I stay, they'll come for you and her. So you'll leave us to die alone?" He hesitated, just long enough for guilt to take root. Then he turned the knob and walked out into the rain. He told himself he'd return one day, when he had power, when the danger had passed. But that day never came. Years blurred into a ruthless climb up the criminal ladder. One deal led to another, one betrayal erased by a bullet. Soon, Peterson's name carried weight, the kind that made men lower their voices. But at night, when the noise faded, he still heard the echo of his daughter's cry, faint and haunting. Money bought him silence. Power bought him respect. But peace? That, he could never afford. On this night, as thunder rolled over the city, a knock came at his office door. It was quiet but confident. "Enter," Peterson said, setting his glass aside. His right-hand man, Marco, stepped in, rain still clinging to his coat. "We found her, boss." Peterson's eyes narrowed. "Who?" Marco placed a thick file on the mahogany desk. "The one you asked about. The girl." The world seemed to tilt. Peterson reached for the file, his hand steady but his pulse wild beneath his skin. He opened it slowly, as though bracing himself for the past to leap out and strangle him. Inside, under a few typed pages, was a single photograph. A young woman, dark-skinned and slender, wearing a white maid's uniform. Her eyes, tired but determined, stared past the camera, as if she'd already lived a lifetime of sorrow. Peterson froze. The glass tower around him might as well have vanished. The rain faded, the thunder dimmed, and all he could hear was the sound of his own heartbeat. Where was this taken? His voice cracked despite himself. "Long Island," Marco replied. "She works for a family called Davison. Been there for a few years. The locals say she keeps to herself. Never complains, never talks back. But the neighbors, they've heard things." "What kind of things?" Marco hesitated. "That they treat her bad, boss. Real bad. The daughter, and makes her life miserable. The mother calls her names, beats her sometimes. And the father, well, he just watches." Peterson's hand tightened around the edge of the desk. For a man who'd once ordered executions without blinking, this was different. This was personal. "She's your blood, sir," Marco said quietly. "You want me to handle it?" Peterson shook his head, his jaw tightening. "No. Not yet." He sank into his chair, staring again at the photo. The resemblance was undeniable, the curve of her jaw, the shape of her lips, even the faint dimple on her left cheek. She was Leah's daughter. His daughter. He remembered Leah's voice, trembling the last time he saw her. "One day, she'll ask why her father left. What should I tell her?" He had no answer then. He barely had one now. The file lay open before him like a confession. Next to the photograph, there was a brief report, dates, addresses, a record of the Davison family's wealth and cruelty. Each line felt like a knife. Peterson leaned back, staring into the ceiling's shadows. His empire, his reputation, his billions. None of it mattered. All he could think of was a little girl who grew up believing her father didn't care. He poured another drink, but didn't touch it. "I'll find her," he murmured. "And they'll pay for every tear she ever cried." Marco nodded once, understanding the tone that meant war. "You want me to start the investigation?" "It's already started," Peterson said coldly. "Gather everything on that family. Their business, their debts, their secrets. I want it all. Quietly. I'll handle the rest." When Marco left, Peterson turned back toward the rain-smeared window. Lightning flashed across the skyline, illuminating his reflection. For the first time, he didn't see the man the world feared, he saw the man who'd failed. He pressed the photograph against his chest, whispering to the memory of Leah. "I'm coming for her. I swear, this time I won't run." Outside, thunder cracked again, not as a warning, but as a promise. And in that moment, the city seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere across town, a young maid wiped her tears in silence, unaware that the ghost of a father she thought long gone had just awakened, and that her world, and the world of those who hurt her, was about to change forever. The evening glittered with wealth. Chandeliers cast a golden haze across the Davison dining hall, bouncing off crystal glasses and polished silverware. The scent of roasted lamb and expensive wine hung thick in the air. Guests in designer suits and gowns filled the long mahogany table, laughter rising like a cruel melody. The Davison mansion had never looked grander, and yet in the middle of it all stood Kendra, the quiet shadow that made their perfection possible. She moved gracefully between chairs, balancing trays and platters as though every step were rehearsed. Her white apron was spotless, her head bowed. She had learned long ago that silence kept her alive. Her eyes stayed down, her voice locked deep within her chest. Every whisper, every snicker from Anne and her friends, she endured like invisible lashes across her back. Mrs. Davison, seated at the head of the table, was radiant in pearls and pride. "To success," she toasted, raising her glass. "May the Davison legacy continue to shine." A wave of cheers followed. Kendra refilled glasses, her movements steady, controlled. She had served these people for years, memorized every gesture, every smirk, every cruelty masked as etiquette. But tonight, something in the air felt different, heavier, and leaned toward one of the guests, a smirk curling on her lips. "Watch this," she whispered. As Kendra passed behind her chair, Anne's elbow nudged the edge of her plate, gently at first, then with deliberate force. The fine china slid off the table, crashing onto the marble floor beside Kendra's feet. The room fell silent. Every head turned. Kendra froze. Shards of porcelain glittered around her shoes like snow under candlelight. The sound still echoed in her ears when Mrs. Davison's voice sliced through the air. "You clumsy fool." Kendra's breath caught. "Ma'am, Enough." Mrs. Davison slammed her palm on the table. "How many times must I tell you to be careful? Do you think plates grow on trees? Apologize." "I'm sorry," Kendra whispered. Louder. Her throat tightened. "I'm sorry, ma'am." And pressed her hand over her mouth, pretending to stifle laughter. The guests exchanged glances, amused, entertained even. To them, this was part of the evening's show. A maid's humiliation had become their after-dinner theater. Kendra knelt, her knees pressing into the cold marble. She gathered the broken pieces with trembling hands. Tiny cuts split her skin open, crimson blooming across her palms. Tears welled in her eyes, but she kept her head low. She didn't want them to see her cry, not again. The sound of their laughter echoed above her like thunder over a drowning soul. And leaned closer, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "You really should be more careful, Kendra. Maybe next time you'll try not to break the expensive ones." Mrs. Davison smirked. "Get it cleaned up quickly. I don't want our guests to lose their appetite." Kendra swallowed hard. The sting of glass and shame burned through her. Her vision blurred as a single tear fell, landing on one of the shards. It shimmered briefly under the chandelier's light before vanishing. She felt the world closing in, the laughter, the whispers, the heavy silence of those who said nothing. And then, it happened. A sudden gust of wind swept through the open hallway. The mansion doors creaked before bursting wide open, the hinges groaning under the force. Conversation died instantly. Every guest turned toward the sound. Outside, Thunder rolled across the night sky. Heavy footsteps entered the room, slow, deliberate, echoing through the marble hall. Each step carried a weight that silenced even Mrs. Davison's arrogance. Kendra froze, still on her knees, her bloodied hands gripping the last shard. From the doorway, a tall figure emerged, a man in a black coat, his presence colder than the storm behind him. Two men followed, equally imposing, their faces unreadable. The stranger's eyes swept across the room, sharp and piercing. For a brief moment, no one spoke. Mr. Davison stood, adjusting his tie nervously. "Can we help you, sir? This is a private gathering." The man didn't answer. He stepped closer, his shoes clicking against the marble. Rain dripped from his coat onto the floor, each drop echoing in the tense silence. His gaze landed on Kendra, still kneeling, trembling, unaware of who stood before her. Something in his expression shifted. A flicker of recognition. Mrs. Davison's annoyance returned, masking her unease. "Excuse me, whoever you are, you're interrupting." But her voice faltered when he finally spoke. His tone was deep, measured, and chillingly calm. "I'm not here for you," he said. "I'm here for her." Every eye turned toward Kendra. She looked up slowly, confusion clouding her tear-streaked face. The stranger's gaze softened for the first time, and in that moment, she saw something unfamiliar: sorrow. The guests exchanged whispers. Mrs. Davison frowned, trying to place the face she was seeing. "Who exactly are you?" she demanded. The man ignored her. "Stand up, Kendra," he said quietly, his voice breaking through the tension like a command the universe itself would obey. Kendra's heart pounded. The tone was unfamiliar, yet something about it, the warmth hidden beneath the authority, stirred a memory she couldn't name. She rose slowly, her cut hands trembling at her sides. The man took another step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "You've suffered enough," he murmured. The guests looked at one another, uncertain whether this was madness or power unfolding before them. Kendra's lips parted, but no words came. The stranger reached into his coat and drew out a folded photograph, worn, creased, and faded by time. He placed it gently on the table before Mrs. Davison. "This," he said, "is who she really is." Mrs. Davison glanced at it, her smugness fading. Her face drained of color as she recognized what she was seeing: a baby in the arms of a smiling young woman, and beside them, the very man standing before her. "You," she stammered. "You're—" But he had already turned away from her. His eyes returned to Kendra, filled with a mixture of pride and pain. And in that breathless silence, before the truth could fully unravel, the storm outside broke loose again, wind howling, thunder roaring, and somewhere deep inside Kendra's chest, something long buried began to awaken. If you were in Kendra's shoes, humiliated, blamed, and broken, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent or fought back? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. Thunder rolled over Long Island like an omen. The front doors of the Davison mansion stood wide open, wind sweeping through the corridors, snuffing out candles and scattering napkins across the dining table. The laughter that had filled the house only moments earlier now died in frightened silence. In the doorway stood a man cloaked in storm. His long black coat dripped with rain, water pooling at his feet, while two men in dark suits lingered behind him, motionless, their presence as intimidating as the thunder itself. Lightning flashed behind them, outlining their silhouettes like avenging spirits. Mrs. Davison's face turned pale. Who are you?" she stammered. The man said nothing at first. His cold, piercing eyes scanned the room, moving past the crystal chandeliers and startled guests until they found what they were looking for: a young black woman on her knees, trembling, her palms streaked with blood. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. That face, her face, it was like seeing the ghost of a life he had lost. Her eyes, her mother's eyes, still carried the same sadness he had once sworn to protect. The sound of rain faded around him. All he could hear was the beating of his own heart. "Kendra," he whispered. The name felt heavy on his tongue, fragile and sacred. She looked up slowly, confusion clouding her tear-stained cheeks. The guests turned toward her, murmuring among themselves. No one understood what was happening, not yet. Peterson stepped forward, his voice steady but trembling at the edges. "Stand up, Kendra." The words hung in the air, soft yet commanding. She hesitated, her body rigid with fear. No one had ever spoken her name like that, with both tenderness and authority. Mrs. Davison finally found her voice. "Excuse me, sir, but this is highly inappropriate." Peterson's eyes flicked toward her, sharp as a blade. She froze mid-sentence, her breath catching in her throat. His stare alone was enough to silence her. There was power in it, not the loud, performative kind the Davisons were used to, but the kind that came from a man who had lived through fire and come out colder. The thunder rumbled again as Peterson took another step closer. "You've spoken enough," he said quietly. And sitting beside her mother, clutched her wine glass nervously. "Mother, what's going on?" Mrs. Davison tried to compose herself. "Nothing we can't handle. This man will leave immediately before I call security." Peterson gave a low, humorless laugh. "Security?" He glanced back at his men, who stood like statues, their hands clasped in front of them, eyes scanning the room. "You can try." His gaze returned to Kendra. She was still kneeling, her breath shallow, her hands shaking. Every part of her screamed confusion and fear. "Who are you?" she whispered. Lightning illuminated his face, rugged, lined with years of burden and guilt. Someone who should have been there a long time ago. The room felt smaller, the air thick with tension. The guests, unsure whether to stay or flee, sat frozen in uneasy silence. Mr. Davison finally rose, trying to sound calm. "Sir, I think there's been some misunderstanding." Peterson cut him off. "There's no misunderstanding." His tone dropped, quiet but lethal. "I know exactly who you are. And I know exactly what you've done to her." A cold hush fell over the table. Kendra looked between them, her heartbeat wild. "What are you talking about?" she asked softly. Peterson reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded photo, the same worn image he had stared at countless nights before. He handed it to her, his hands trembling slightly. "You were too young to remember," he said. "But I never stopped looking for you." Her fingers brushed the photo. She saw a younger version of herself in her mother's arms, and beside them, a man with the same eyes that now stared at her with quiet torment. Her lips parted. "No, it can't be." "It's me, Kendra," he said, his voice breaking. "Your father." Gasps rippled through the room. Mrs. Davison stood abruptly, her composure cracking. "This is absurd," she snapped. "You expect us to believe." "Silence," Peterson barked, his voice deep and thunderous. It wasn't a shout, it was a command that came from somewhere far darker, far colder than anything she'd ever encountered. She sank back down, speechless. Kendra's vision blurred. Her father, the man she'd imagined in her dreams, the man she'd cursed in her tears, now stood before her, drenched in rain and remorse. "Why now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why come back after all these years?" Peterson looked at her as if every word stabbed him deeper. "Because I found out what they did to you," he said quietly. "And because I couldn't live one more day knowing that while I built an empire, my own daughter was living in chains." Tears spilled down Kendra's cheeks. She wanted to hate him, to scream, to demand answers. But the storm outside mirrored the one raging within her: grief, confusion, a desperate longing for the love she never had. Mrs. Davison tried again to regain control. "This is ridiculous. You can't just walk in here and—" "I can," Peterson said coldly. "And I will." He turned to his men. "Take note of everything in this house. From this moment, it's all under review." Mr. Davison stepped forward, panicked. "You have no right." "I have every right," Peterson interrupted. His gaze returned to Kendra. "And she has more than I ever did." Kendra wiped her tears, her breath trembling. For the first time, she stood tall. The years of humiliation weighed less now. Somehow his presence, the storm, the truth, had given her a strength she didn't know she still had. Peterson's expression softened. "You don't have to kneel anymore, my child." The storm outside raged louder, as if echoing his words. And for the first time in her life, Kendra lifted her head, no longer the maid they had broken, but the daughter of a man the world feared. What would you do if the father who abandoned you returned at the darkest moment of your life? Would you forgive him or turn away? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your opinion matters. Morning broke with no peace at the Davison mansion. The storm had passed, but its shadow lingered in the air, thick, heavy, and unrelenting. The sky outside was gray, mirroring the despair settling within those marble walls. For years, the Davisons had been untouchable. Their wealth had silenced whispers, their power had buried secrets. But that illusion crumbled overnight. By sunrise, the estate that once gleamed with arrogance was swarming with men in black suits, Peterson's men. Their movements were calm but calculated, as if every step had been rehearsed. Lawyers entered with thick folders, investigators carried sealed envelopes, and a quiet authority filled the space where pride once lived. Mrs. Davison, still in her night robe, stormed down the staircase. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice trembling between outrage and fear. "Who are these people?" One of the men glanced at her without emotion. "We're here under direct authorization from Mr. Peterson." Mr. Davison followed, his face pale, his composure fractured. "Peterson? What authorization? This is our home." "Not anymore," came the low, steady voice from the grand foyer. They turned. Peterson stood there, freshly dressed in a dark tailored suit, his presence as cold as the marble beneath their feet. Beside him, Kendra, no longer in her maid's apron, wore a simple black dress. Her eyes no longer carried fear, only calm. Mrs. Davison's anger cracked. You can't just barge into people's lives, Anne." "I already did," Peterson interrupted. "And I'm not here to bargain. I'm here to finish what you started." She glared at him, voice rising. "We'll call the police. This is illegal." Peterson smirked faintly. "Illegal? You really want to talk about that?" He nodded toward one of his lawyers. The man handed over a stack of documents, each stamped and sealed. Fraudulent tax filings. False charity donations. Employee mistreatment complaints. Offshore accounts under fake names. "Shall I go on?" Mrs. Davison's face drained of color. Peterson continued, his tone calm, almost detached. "I could have destroyed you quietly, but that wouldn't have been justice. You built your wealth on other people's suffering, on people like her." He glanced toward Kendra. "It's only fair the balance shifts." And stumbled down the stairs, mascara streaking her face, eyes red from crying. "Please," she whispered, "we didn't mean." Kendra looked at her, not with hatred, but with something deeper, pity. "You meant every word," she said softly. Mr. Davison took a hesitant step forward. "Peterson, listen. Whatever this is, we can fix it. You don't have to ruin us." Peterson turned his gaze on him, ice-cold and final. "Ruin you? You did that yourself." He gestured toward his team. "Freeze every account. Liquidate the company shares. Transfer ownership of all assets under her name." Mr. Davison's jaw dropped. "You can't do that." But even as he spoke, his phone buzzed with messages, urgent alerts from the bank, missed calls from his board, news notifications flashing on the screen. The Davison name was already collapsing. Their empire was unraveling faster than they could breathe. Mrs. Davison clutched her pearls like they were her last lifeline. "You monster," she hissed. Peterson didn't flinch. "No," he said evenly. "Just a father who finally learned what monsters look like." The sound of papers shuffling filled the silence. Peterson turned to Kendra, his expression softening for the first time. "You once told me you were blamed for everything that went wrong," he said quietly. "Today, you take the credit for what goes right." He handed her a single document, crisp, official, bearing her name in bold. "This," he said, "is the transfer of ownership. Every property, every account, every business they own, now belongs to you." Kendra stared at it, her breath catching. Her hands trembled as she took the papers. The weight of them felt heavier than gold. This wasn't revenge, it was closure. Mrs. Davison's voice broke. "You think this will make you better than us?" Kendra met her gaze. "No," she said softly. "It just makes me free." For the first time, Mrs. Davison had no words. The air between them felt final, like a door closing on a lifetime of cruelty. And sobbed quietly in the corner, her pride gone. Mr. Davison slumped into a chair, staring blankly at the floor, the mighty reduced to dust. Kendra turned and walked through the same hallways where she'd once been scolded for breathing too loudly. The servants who once mocked her lowered their eyes in silence as she passed. Her steps echoed differently now, not like footsteps of fear, but of power reclaimed. She paused by the grand mirror at the end of the corridor. The reflection staring back wasn't the broken girl who once wept in the dark. It was a woman reborn. Her mother's strength lived in her eyes, her father's resolve in her posture. Peterson joined her, standing a step behind. "This house," he said quietly, "was their throne. Now it's your story." She nodded slowly. "I don't want to live here," she said. "Not where pain lives." He smiled faintly. "Then burn the past. Build your own." Outside, the sun broke through the gray sky for the first time in days. Light spilled across the estate, chasing away the last shadow of the storm. Kendra stepped out into the morning air, the wind brushing against her face. Behind her, the Davison mansion, once a symbol of power, now felt like nothing more than an empty shell. Every tear she'd shed, every humiliation she'd endured, had led to this moment. And as Peterson watched her walk forward, head high, heart unburdened, he knew that, for the first time, justice had finally found its voice. The morning light spread softly across the Davison estate, painting the tall gates gold and warm. The same gates that had once closed her off from freedom now stood open before her. The air was different today. It carried no weight, no bitterness, only the quiet calm that comes after a long storm. Weeks had passed since that night, the night everything changed. The mansion was no longer filled with laughter that mocked, nor footsteps that intimidated. Silence now reigned within its walls. For the first time, it was a silence that brought peace, not pain. Kendra stood before the gates, dressed in a tailored cream suit. Her posture was upright, confident, yet her eyes held softness, the gentleness of someone who had learned strength the hard way. The world saw her now not as a servant, but as Kendra Davison, the new owner of the estate and the rightful heir to the justice life once denied her. The same servants who once sneered when she passed now lowered their heads in respect. The cook who used to order her around couldn't meet her gaze. The gardener, who had once laughed at her tears, mumbled greetings under his breath. Kendra responded with a simple nod, no malice in her heart. They had been witnesses to her pain, perhaps even participants in it, but she had grown beyond vengeance. As she walked through the long marble corridor, sunlight filtered through tall windows, reflecting off the polished floors she had once scrubbed on her knees. The scent of the house still lingered, roses and lemon polish, but now it carried a different memory. Not of servitude, but of survival. And watched her from behind the curtains upstairs, her once arrogant face pale and fearful. The girl who had once tormented Kendra now hid from the woman she had created. Kendra caught her reflection faintly in the glass and paused. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. Anne's guilt was already punishment enough. In the grand dining room, the scene of her greatest humiliation, everything remained untouched. The crystal chandelier, the polished silver, the same long table where she had once been forced to kneel. Kendra stood before it, remembering the sound of breaking glass, the laughter, the sting of words that had scarred her spirit. But now the memories no longer hurt. They reminded her of how far she'd come. Her father, Peterson, had tried to persuade her to keep the mansion. "It's yours now," he'd said. "You deserve to live in it." But Kendra had shaken her head. "I don't want to live in a place built from cruelty. I want to build something better, something that heals, not haunts." That was exactly what she intended to do. Later that week, the real estate contract was signed. The Davison mansion was sold for millions, every penny of which now belonged to her. Yet Kendra didn't celebrate. Her victory wasn't measured in wealth, it was in freedom. She used the first share of her fortune to establish the Leah Foundation, named after her late mother, a sanctuary for orphan girls and abused domestic workers. The foundation promised shelter, education, and hope, the things she once prayed for but never received. During the inauguration ceremony, reporters gathered around, eager to photograph the woman whose story had captured the city's heart. They called her the Maid who rose to power, a poetic headline that didn't capture the truth. Kendra hadn't risen because of luck or revenge. She had risen because she refused to let cruelty define her. Standing on the podium, she spoke with grace and conviction. "I was once invisible in a house full of light. I was blamed for things I didn't do, silenced when I spoke, and punished for existing. But every tear I shed taught me something, that dignity cannot be stolen, and silence is not weakness. Today, I stand not for revenge, but for justice. For every woman who has been treated as less. For every girl who thought her voice didn't matter, this foundation is yours." Applause filled the hall, but in Kendra's heart, there was only peace. That night, she returned one last time to the mansion before the new owners moved in. The hallways were empty now, stripped of luxury. Dust motes danced in the fading light as she walked toward the front door. Each step echoed softly, like a heartbeat slowing down after a long race. She paused at the threshold, looking back once more. This house had witnessed her pain, her tears, her humiliation. But it had also witnessed her strength, and her rebirth. She whispered to the empty halls, her voice steady. "I forgive you." Outside, dawn was breaking over New York. The city stretched and glittered beneath the morning sky, alive, hopeful, endless. Kendra stepped through the gates, her heels clicking against the cobblestone driveway. Behind her, the gate swung shut with a quiet finality. She turned her face toward the horizon, where the first golden rays touched the skyline. For a moment, she felt her mother beside her, not as a memory, but as a presence warm and proud. Kendra closed her eyes and smiled faintly. "Mama," she whispered, "your daughter made it." A soft breeze swept through the air, carrying the scent of rain and roses, her mother's favorite. It felt like an answer. And as Kendra walked away from the mansion that once caged her, she knew one truth deep within her soul: she hadn't just survived. She had risen, gracefully, powerfully, completely. The story of the Maid was over. The story of Kendra Peterson had just begun. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.